It was the summer of 2009, and I was a 20-year-old college student, full of ambition and excitement. I was about to start my final year at Redwood University, preparing for either business or law school. My life seemed to be on the right track. I was a star athlete on the college baseball team, had a near-perfect GPA, and was surrounded by family members who valued education and success. My extended family was filled with lawyers, doctors, and business moguls. Everything seemed perfect, but all of that would come crashing down one afternoon. It was after baseball practice when I first noticed something was wrong. I checked my phone to find hundreds of missed calls and text messages, many of them vague and filled with anger. "Pick up the phone," one read. Another simply said, "You monster." I didn't understand. Confused, I stepped outside and called my mom. Her voice, when she answered, was unrecognizable, filled with rage and panic. Before I could get another word in, my uncle appeared out of nowhere, slamming a fist into my face. "You're going to pay for what you did," he screamed. My nose erupted in blood as I stumbled backward, dazed. "Get home now," my dad shouted, holding my uncle back. The drive home was a blur. I could barely see through the blood and swelling, but the confusion was worse than the pain. What had I done? When I walked into the house, the atmosphere was suffocating. My mother screamed at me, her eyes wild with fury. My uncle shouted that I needed to be arrested. "Call the cops," he yelled. I had no idea what was going on. What did I do? I cried out. It was my cousin Lydia who finally spoke. At 12 years old, she accused me of assaulting her during a family gathering earlier that year. I denied it, but no one listened. No one believed me. My father's rage was unbearable. He punched me in the stomach, knocking the air out of me. "Get out," he ordered. "You're no son of mine." I was crushed. In a daze, I gathered my clothes, dumped into trash bags, and loaded them into the old van my parents had given me for hauling sports equipment. I didn't know where to go. I called a few of my teammates and stayed at their place that night, but I couldn't bring myself to talk to anyone. For a week, I tried calling home, but there was no answer. Then, my father sent me a text. "Leave us alone, you monster. Rot in hell." I couldn't describe how it felt. It was like my whole world had collapsed. The person I had been, the son, the brother, the athlete, was gone. Just like that. The university called soon after. My tuition was due, but with no way to contact my parents and no savings of my own, I was forced to drop out of the baseball team. I found a full-time job and began working the overnight shift, struggling to pay for the remaining tuition. My life became a cycle of exhaustion, surviving on little sleep and cheap meals. I spent winter living in my van, enduring the cold and harsh weather. Somehow, I managed to graduate, but my family never showed up to support me. They had abandoned me. I spent the night in the van, drinking whiskey until I passed out. I spiraled deeper into darkness, unable to escape the pain. For 2 years, I drifted from job to job, never staying long enough to build any kind of stability. The booze and drugs became my only companions. I trusted no one. I avoided children. I couldn't bear the thought of facing the people who had betrayed me. Then my van, my only shelter, died. The heat and air conditioning were gone, and I was left to freeze in the winter and sweat through the summer. In desperation, I climbed to the roof of an apartment building one night, preparing to end it all. I was done. I had nothing left. I closed my eyes, ready to jump. Then I heard a voice behind me. "Stop!" I turned around to see a woman running toward me, pleading for me to come down. My body was frozen, my mind a storm of emotions. She reached out her hand. "Please climb down," she begged. Something inside me snapped, and I took her hand. I collapsed in her arms. EMTs arrived and took me to the hospital, where I spent 2 days recovering. When I was discharged, she was waiting for me. Her name was Emily. She was 22, warm and kind, a stark contrast to the cold, heartless world I had come from. She worked for her father's company, and despite my protests, she insisted on helping me get back on my feet. She helped me get a job at her father's office as a receptionist, and during that time, I quit drinking and went cold turkey on the drugs. Emily drove me to work, cooked for me, and spent every moment helping me rebuild my life. I stayed with her for 3 weeks, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was a burden. She had done enough. I needed to leave. I had to do it on my own. Emily, however, refused to let me go. "Stay with me until you see a therapist," she insisted. I broke down in tears, angry at myself, but she wouldn't give up. Slowly, I agreed. For a month, I saw a therapist that Emily paid for, though I barely opened up. Yet, I made progress. Emily invited me to her family's home for a birthday party, and I went reluctantly. There, Emily's father, Richard, and her family welcomed me with open arms. But as they asked me about my past, memories I had tried to bury came rushing back. I snapped. I couldn't take it anymore. They disowned me. I shouted, my voice cracking. They accused me of something I didn't do. My own family turned their backs on me, and I've been left to die alone in this world. I tried to run, but Emily's father, Richard, grabbed my shoulder. I collapsed to the ground, expecting to be hit. Instead, Richard knelt beside me. "Look at me. Son," he said. "I can see it in your eyes. You're not the man they said you were. You're not the monster they made you out to be. Let us help you." That was the moment my life changed. Over the next few years, Emily and I grew closer. We fell in love, and with the help of her family, I went back to school to finish my degree in business. I started a new career, bought my first car, and even bought a house. We had a son on the way. For the first time in years, I was happy. I had healed. Then one day, my phone rang while I was at work. I didn't recognize the number, but when I answered, I froze. "Opie, is that you?" The voice was unmistakable. It was my mother. I hung up, my heart racing. I turned my phone off, but it didn't stop the flood of emotions. My mother kept calling, leaving messages. After 2 weeks of silence, I finally reached out to them. I agreed to meet them at a coffee shop. Emily came with me, standing by my side as I faced the people who had hurt me so deeply. When my parents saw me, they ran toward me with open arms, but Emily stepped in. Between us, "No hugs," she said firmly. "Please sit." As we talked, my parents explained that Lydia had confessed. She had made up the story all. Those years ago, driven by her need for attention, they told me they had been blinded by their love for her, and they had failed me. My father admitted he had hit me out of anger and regret. They asked for forgiveness. I was calm, but inside, the pain was overwhelming. Why wasn't I allowed to tell my side of the story? I asked. My father froze. The money meant for my education, the support for me. "You gave it to Lydia, didn't you?" I showed them a photo of me on the 4th of July, miles away from the party where Lydia claimed the assault had happened. My mother turned pale. My father stammered, realizing I had been telling the truth all along. I had one question left. What is Lydia's punishment? Their response was what broke me. "She's a kid. She has a future ahead of her," they said. "She can't be punished like you were." I couldn't take it anymore. "You destroyed my life, and now you want me to forgive her? She gets to live a life while I had to live in a van for 2 years. You want me to forget everything?" I stood up, my voice shaking. "You lost your son 7 years ago. I'm gone. Move on." With that, Emily and I walked out, leaving my parents at the table, crying. I haven't seen them since. They still reach out from time to time, but I've made my peace. Lydia's life, from what I've heard, hasn't been easy. Her luxuries have been taken away, but I don't care. I have my own life now, and I'm still healing. Maybe Someday, I'll see them again. But for now, my family is Emily and our son. I'm no longer that broken 20-year-old. I'm a man, a survivor. And that's enough for me.